All right, we're back, and we're reading Mind Energy, or we're reading an essay by Henri Bergson from Mind Energy, and it is called "On the Body and the Soul." And he says that whether you believe in, you know, whether you believe in uh, the soul or not, he says it doesn't matter because we're just going to talk about experience and what experience can tell us. He's going to bracket out all assumptions about scientific theories for the most part. For now, he's going to, and he's going to bracket out all the assumptions you make, what you think you know. He's just going to tell us what common sense tells us about experience, and we've covered some of those things in the last video. So catch up if you haven't. Anyway, so he says that he's talking about voluntary action and the I, and he says that the I creates something new inside itself as well as outside of itself when it wills these voluntary actions, since the voluntary action reacts on him who wills it. So when I act, it also acts on me because I perceive the action at the same time that I'm willing the action. And he says that it modifies in some degree the character of the person from whom the action emanates, and accomplishes by a kind of miracle that creation of self by itself, which seems to be the very object of human life. And this creation of self by self kind of reminds us of Francisco J. Varela and the enactive theory of perception or cognition on the self-producing or well, if you're familiar with autopoiesis, if you're not, look it up. It's interesting though. His ideas is anyway. He says to sum up then, to summarize then, besides the body, which is confined to the present moment in time and limited to the place it occupies in space, which behaves automatically and reacts mechanically to external forces, to external influences, we apprehend something which is much more extended than the body in space and time, or much more extended than the body in space, and which endures through time, something which requires from or imposes on the body movements no longer automatic and foreseen, but unforeseeable and free. He's talking about free will. And he says, this thing, which overflows the body on all sides, and which creates acts by newly creating itself, is the I, the soul, the mind. Mind being precisely a force which can draw from itself more than it contains, yield more than it receives, and give more than it has. This is what I believe I see. Such is the appearance. So someone may say to me, very good, but it is only an appearance. Look closer. Listen to what science says. In the first place, you will yourself acknowledge that this soul is never seen at work without a body. Its body accompanies it from birth to death. And even supposing the soul be really distinct from the body, everything happens as though it were inseparably united to the body. Your consciousness vanishes if you inhale chloroform, and is heightened if you drink alcohol or coffee. A slight intoxication may set troubles profoundly affecting intelligence, sensibility, and will, or may set up troubles profoundly affecting intelligence, sensibility, and will. A lasting intoxication, such as certain infectious diseases leave behind, oh, a lasting intoxication, such as certain infectious diseases leave behind, will produce insanity. If it be true that the autopsy does not invariably disclose lesions in the brain of the insane, at least it often does, and even when there is no visible lesion, it is probable that a chemical change in the tissues has caused the disease. Let us go further. Now, this is still someone objecting to Henri Bergson. He's playing the role. He's creating a dialogue so that he's trying to give the best possible case against his own argument here. So he's still playing the role of devil's advocate here. And he's saying, let's go further. Now, science can localize indefinite convolutions of the brain, definite functions of the mind, such as the faculty of performing voluntary movements, of which you just spoke now. of which you spoke just now. Now, lesions of particular points in the Rolandic area between the frontal and parietal lobes involve the loss of movements of the arm, of the leg, of the face, of the tongue, according to the exact spot affected. Even memory, which you consider an essential function of the mind, has been partly localized. At the foot of the third left frontal convolution are seated the memories of the movements of the articulation of speech. In one region between the first and second left temporal convolutions is preserved the memory of the sound of words, so speaking and perceiving sound. At the posterior part of the second left parietal convolution are deposited the visual images of words and of letters, etc. Now let us go still further. Now you said that in space as in time, the soul overflows the body to which it is joined. Now let us consider space. It is true that sight and hearing go beyond the limits of the body. But why? Because vibrations from afar have impressed the eye and ear and been transmitted to the brain. There, in the brain, the stimulation has become auditory or visual sensation. Now, perception is therefore within the body and not spread abroad. Now, let us consider time. You claim that the mind embraces the past, while the body is confined within a present which recommences without ceasing. But we recall the past only because our body preserves the still present traces of it. Now, the impressions made by objects on the brain abide there, like the images on a sensitive plate. They've been etched in, or the records of gramophone or phonographic discs. You remember during Bergson's time, it was the phonograph was the metaphor for the mind. Now today, it's the computer is the metaphor of the mind. So he's pointing that out. That's what they were thinking. That's the metaphor they were thinking in terms of then. That memory was etched into the brain like a phonograph or like a phonographic disc that you would play on a phonograph or a gramophone. And he says, continuing, just as the disc repeats the melody when the apparatus is set working, so the brain revives the memory when the requisite shock is produced at the point where the impression is retained. So then, no more in time than in space does the soul overflow the body. But is there really a soul distinct from the body? We've just seen that changes, or to be more exact, displacements and new groupings of molecules and atoms are continually going on in the brain. Some of these express themselves in what we call sensations, others in memories. Now, without any doubt, brain changes correspond to all intellectual, sensible, and voluntary facts. To them, consciousness is superadded, a kind of phosphorescence. It is like the luminous trail of the match we strike on the wall in the dark. Now, this phosphorescence, when he's talking about consciousness, being, as it were, a self-illumination, begets strange internal optical illusions. So consciousness imagines itself to be modifying, directing, and producing the movements, when in fact it is itself the result of those movements. The belief in free will consists in this, an illusion. The truth is that we could look through the skull and observe the inner working of the brain with instruments magnifying some billion times more with instruments magnifying some billion times more than our most powerful microscopes. If we then should witness the dance of molecules and atoms and electrons of which the cerebral cortex is composed, and if in addition we possess the rule for transposing the cerebral into the mental, a dictionary, so to speak, which would enable us to translate each figure of the dance into the language of thought and feeling, we should know quite as well as of the supposed, or we should know, oh, coming up on the end here. We'll continue.